What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Penn State 365 podcast. As always, I'm your host, Richie O'Leary, and the defensive coordinator search for Penn State continues today as the Nittany Lions are still without a leader of their defense, I should say. As Tom Allen decided to leave for Clemson a couple weeks ago now, for the same position, kind of a lateral type move. Although it was partially because of his family. He has his daughters live in the Carolinas, and it sounds like his wife just didn't like Central PA, which to each their own. Either way, the list of names continues to dwindle, and then we continue to add new names. It goes back and forth. We know D'Anton Lynn was a candidate. The USC defensive coordinator, former Penn State alumni, also former UCLA defensive coordinator. Sounds like they pushed for him pretty hard. Ended up getting its extension at USC, so he's going to stay there. We know that Corey Heatherman was an early-ish target. They looked into him a little bit, but he signed an extension with Minnesota. In that extension, there was a very interesting clause specifically saying if he left for another Big Ten program as a defensive coordinator, he would end up owing around 50 to 60% of his remaining salary back to the program. Part of that is because he was courted by Rutgers. Part of that is because Penn State looked into him. And P.J. Fleck just wasn't having it. And I don't think he really expected Miami to go after him, but Miami came after him and paid him a shit ton of money. So now he's Miami's defensive coordinator. Some other names, we know Jim Knowles was a name that we kept monitoring. And we kind of continue to monitor, I should say. Jim Knowles is the Ohio State national champion, Ohio State defensive coordinator. There's a lot of talk of him going back to Oklahoma. Again, the wives play a major factor in most of these things. And it sounds like she actually wants to go back to Oklahoma, where he was for a couple years as Oklahoma State's DC. We know the University of Oklahoma is looking for a defensive coordinator, so it's not too shocking. So, yeah, we know Penn State's pushing there, but it's not going to be an easy sell, especially for a wife that doesn't sound like she likes Ohio. If you don't like Ohio, I can't imagine you liking Central PA either. So I feel like it's a super long shot, but James Franklin and crew are pushing for that one to see if that happens, if they can make that happen. If you could steal the national champion's defensive coordinator, that is a huge move right there. That being said, my best guess right now, gun to my head, he's going to Oklahoma. And that leaves us with a couple. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Ephraim Banda, the safeties coach for the Cleveland Browns, was interviewed by Penn State. We know he was a candidate. Sounds like he dropped down off the list, and sounds like he's actually going to stay in the NFL, which, to each their own. Some guys just prefer it that way. They don't have to worry about recruiting. They don't have to worry about anything other than specifically coaching. On top of it, Ephraim Banda is a guy who's going to be an NFL defensive coordinator in the next couple of years. He's already had interviews with the Colts. Who else? I think the Falcons looked into him a little bit. He's kind of an up-and-comer. He's 36. So he's going to be an NFL defensive coordinator sooner rather than later, it sounds like. As long as his team or his unit specifically doesn't come shit to bed. But I guess that's actually possible with the Cleveland Browns. So maybe a name monitor down the line. But right now he's sticking in the NFL. So that leaves us with a couple new names here. Let's start with number excuse me. Let's start with number one. Lyle Hemphill. Actually, no, let's go back. Anthony Poindexter continues to be a candidate that we continue to hear doesn't necessarily want the job, but would do the job if James asked him to. That being said, he's very content in his role as co-DC/safeties coach. He likes managing his little position group. He doesn't have to worry about a whole entire defense. It's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility. And this is a guy who more than likely, I continue to say this, but it's like a full-blown fact at this point. If Virginia fires Tony Elliott, who's been 11-23 over 3 seasons with Virginia, this next upcoming season, which he's on a very big hot seat. I think he's ranked top 10 in terms of coaching hot seats in college football right now. Anthony Poindexter would be the number one name on most of UVA fans' lists, and along with the UVA athletic department's list. We know he finished second for the job a couple years ago, so I would be a little shocked if he didn't end up getting that job. So if you were to promote him, which is fine, he has defensive coordinator experience at UConn. He's been with Penn State for a while now. He understands how Penn State works, how State College works, how James Franklin likes his defense called and everything. He hasn't called plays in a couple years, but he has done it before, so he knows what it takes. However, if you hire him, there's a solid chance he could end up leaving in a year from now, and then Penn State's back at square one, and you're interviewing candidates all over again. The other two names I'm keeping an eye on right now are Lyle Hemphill from James Madison. He just coached a very, very talented defense at James Madison. I'm going to pull up the stats real quick. But Lyle Hemphill is also considered a big up-and-coming name. Some of you might recall. Wait, hold on. Let's see. So Lyle Hemphill actually led the Sun Belt this past season. It was his first season at James Madison, coming over from Duke, where he was the co-DC/safeties coach, same exact role as Anthony Poindexter at Penn State. James Madison obviously lost Kurt Signetti to Indiana this past season. They hired Holy Cross head coach Bob Chesney. Bob Chesney went out and found his guy in D.C., Lyle Hemphill, a guy that they coached together with. They both coached together back at Delaware Valley about 20. What am I looking at now? 22 years ago. Whew, that is a long time ago. But James Madison's defense was a big reason why they were able to go 8-4 in their first year with the program. Led the Sun Belt in yards allowed per game, points allowed per game. Allowing 322 yards per game and 20.8 points per game. Not to mention, they had that crazy game against North Carolina where they ended up beating them 70-50. And if you take away that game, technically, instead of averaging or giving up 20 points per game, they only give up 18 points per game. So they had a hell of a year. On top of that, he's actually developed a ton of different guys. NFL All-Pro safety Jesse Bates III and Carlos Boogie Basham at Wake Forest during his time there, where he was the defensive coordinator for a couple years. Now, if you look at those numbers from his D.C. stint at Wake Forest from 2019 to 2021, they weren't great, but that was also a very high-powered, fast-paced offense. But he did help Wake Forest get an 11-win season, which, nonetheless, still pretty impressive. He was a FCS Defensive Coordinator of the Year at Stony Brook, coached at Delaware, where he was actually on the same staff as former Penn State OC Kirk Shiraka. Back in 2020 or 2004 and 2005, Delaware native. His dad, Joe Hemphill, is considered one of the top Delaware high school coaches of all time. So he's from the Northeast. He has those ties. He's FCS defensive coordinator, FCS defensive coordinator of the year back in 2014, 2015. So he has a lot of nice ties. He's 44 years old. He's young. He's developed DBs. His defense is more of like a Manny Diaz style, where it's very aggressive, very all about creating havoc up front, basically. And he did that this past season with his defensive ends. They're able to get around those tackles, be able to cause that quarterback to make erratic throws, and it's all about creating turnovers for him. He's putting his guys on islands, basically back into secondary and man coverage most of the time. And he trusts his DBs more kind of like what Manny did. And it's all about creating that havoc, whether it be the defensive tackles creating havoc on the interior, whether it be the edge rushers just forcing the quarterback up in the pocket and making him just make an erratic throw, making him kind of force something that he doesn't really want to. So a name to keep an eye on. I think it's going to be an interesting one to see where he ends up, because he's also being courted by Rutgers and Virginia Tech. For their DC positions. So that's two other schools to keep an eye on there. We know Virginia Tech's been talking about him very heavily. We know Brent Pry wants him as their DC, but he's also considering other jobs as well. The third name on this list is one of the newest names, and that's Green Bay Packers linebacker coach / run game coordinator Anthony Campanelli. Anthony Campanelli, for those of you that don't know, I'm a Jersey guy myself. Anthony Campanelli, the Campanelli family basically ran New Jersey high school football for God knows how long. Nunzio Campanelli was the former Bergen Catholic head coach. He took Bergen Catholic to multiple state titles before joining the college coaching ranks, where he coached at Rutgers for a couple years as the tight ends coach, and then the interim OC, then the interim head coach, and then ended up back to tight ends coach and back to interim OC when they fired someone else. And now he's currently Syracuse quarterbacks coach. He's considered a big reason why Kyle McCord was able to do what he did this past season. That's Nunzio Campanelli. The other brother, Nick Campanelli, is the current head coach of DePaul Catholic, which just produced a Power 5. This is the 2025 class. A Power 5 running back, a Power 5 quarterback in 2026, a Power 5 DB going to Ohio State, a Power 5 DB going to Ohio State, a Power 5 running back who is going to Boston College, a Power 5 quarterback who has offers from several SEC schools and Big Ten schools. So they kind of just produce at a very high rate. DePaul Catholic's one of the best programs in the state currently. And then there's Anthony Campanelli, who is the current candidate for the Penn State DC job. Anthony Campanelli coached at Don Bosco Prep and back in 2009 and 2011. And he was a big reason why they were so productive back then, Don Bosco. He had Don Bosco Prep rolling as he was the offensive coordinator. Now, I know that sounds weird because he's a candidate for the defensive coordinator, but I'll get to that in a sec. During his time at Don Bosco Prep, when he was the OC in 2010 and 2011, he led them to back-to-back state titles, which is not easy considering how talented New Jersey is, and the Big North specifically. But he also had them ranked as the #1 high school football program in the country per Max Preps. That's super impressive. Now, move along a little bit. He ended up making his journey to the college ranks, joining his alma mater at Rutgers. He's a Fair Lawn, New Jersey native. He kind of quickly just moved from grad assistant to full-time assistant coach, going to tight ends first, where he helped develop a Tyler Croft, who was an All-American Conference in 2015, and ended up being a third-round pick in the 2015 NFL Draft. A year later, he got promoted to wide receivers coach, where he helped Leonte Carew develop into an All-Big Ten third-team wide receiver, and also went selected in the third round of the 2016 NFL Draft. Ends up moving on, goes to Boston College for a couple years, where he leads that DB's room. That DB's room he was leading for 3 seasons. In his 3 years, he helped 6 different DBs earn all ACC conference honors, 4 of which would go on to be drafted. He was named 2017 DB's Coach of the Year by Football Scoop, and really just helped them help their defense in general just become one of the better defenses in all of college football under Adazio. Those were his kind of golden years for Adazio before he ended up getting canned down the line. Spends a year at Michigan in 2019 where he helped develop Josh Uche and a couple other guys. I probably just pronounced that one wrong, but I don't really didn't look too deep into his Michigan year because it was only one single season. It was, but he did help them finish top 25 in total defense, rushing defense, and scoring defense, where he's the linebackers coach before moving on to the NFL. Now, the NFL is probably where he had his most success, to be honest with you. He joined the Miami Dolphins in 2020 and spent 4 seasons with the program or with the franchise. In those 4 seasons, they ranked number 4 in the league with sacks, number 6 in rushing defense, number 8 in takeaways, and number 5 in forced fumbles. That's extremely, extremely impressive to me. Most of that was under Brian Flores, I believe, because I think Flores was the one that hired him, which isn't too shocking considering Flores is a New York guy. And 2 years under 2 years under Flores, and actually survived the head coaching change. Anytime someone survives the head coaching change and not just survives it for a single year but multiple years, tells me that they're a pretty damn good coach and someone sees something in them, as McDaniels did, and Flores, I should say, too. Ends up leaving in 2024, this past offseason, to join the Green Bay Packers. Now, he joined the Green Bay Packers as their run game coordinator / linebackers coach. He joined the Packers as they hired Jeff Hafley, the former Boston College head coach and former Pittsburgh assistant, Rutgers assistant, et cetera, who became the defensive coordinator of the Packers this past season. The two are very, very familiar with one another. They're similar in age, and they also grew up less than 20 minutes from one another up in North Jersey. So there's a couple ties there. Now, here's the deciding factors here. Would he like to be a defensive coordinator? Yes, correct. The issue is he's getting looked at by some as a defensive coordinator in the NFL already. He already had an interview with the Miami Dolphins a year or two ago as for their defensive coordinator spot. Didn't end up getting a job. That's fine. Moving along, he's now with the Packers. Jeff Hafley is set to interview as the head coach of the New York Jets. So here's scenario 1. If Jeff Hafley gets the New York Jets job, his first call for defensive coordinator is Anthony Campanelli. If Jeff Hafley leaves the Packers shortlist will feature Anthony Campanelli for DC. So either way, it sounds like if Halfway ends up leaving, he has a very good shot at getting one of those two DC spots. I think he'd probably just take the guaranteed thing, go back closer to home, take the Jets job, and so be it. Now that's also also it's not the word. It's also dependent on the Jets actually hiring him. Now the thing is, the Jets just interviewed one of Green Bay Packers executive guys. I forget what his name is. Sullivan something. John Eric Sullivan. I forget how. I think it's Eric John. And they're more than likely he's going to go to a guy he trusts. Hence the Jeff Halfway interview. It makes sense for a GM to just hire some guy he's already worked with previously. You hire Jeff Halfway, he's Jersey guy, this, that, New York Jets leader, yada, yada, yada. So if they were to hire him as their GM, it sounds like Halfway has a really good shot at the job. Now, that's far from guaranteed because they're looking at Detroit Lions, DC, Aaron Glenn as well. So we'll see what happens there. I guess there's a chance Halfway could get another job elsewhere too. But right now it sounds like Halfway's here with the Packers to stay, pending the head coach offer. Because, who's turning down a head coach offer in the NFL? There's 32 Kaveh jobs in the NFL, and those are the premier football jobs. Anyway, so that's the other couple scenarios. We know it would be something interesting to see if Penn State were to go after Campanelli. Now, we know he's a serious candidate for the job. We know he has some interest in the job. The question is, would he leave the NFL? Because I've been told multiple times that he really doesn't have a ton of interest in the college game or going back to the college game. He also hasn't been in the college game since NIL has become such a factor. Now, that doesn't really matter, I guess, because as a defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, James Franklin really doesn't ask his guys to recruit that much, and most schools don't either. Like coordinators, their job is to player develop and get the schemes and get game planning, and all that other stuff done. It's all about coaching when you're a coordinator. It's the nice part of it. So it's been said that he really doesn't want to go back to the college game, but this could be his first ever shot as a defensive coordinator. He's never called, or I should say never. He hasn't called plays since he was at Don Bosco back in 2011. And obviously Don Bosco High School is not, it's not the NFL level. He's never called plays at the college level. He was the co-DC at Boston College in 2018, but he still wasn't calling plays there. So it's a lot of risk there because he's never done it. That being said, I know the Campanelli family very well. I know that he is a very smart X's and O's coach. He's not the aggressive. I don't think he'll play that aggressive style that Manny Diaz has or the aggressive style that, say, a Lyle Hemphill has. But I think he would be more of a Tom Allen type where it's all about X's and O's. It's all about drawing up the schemes. He's going to create pressure with his defense, but it's more so that bend don't break defense, in my opinion. Now, we don't know that for sure because he's never actually called plays. So that's the other issue. Is it risky for James Franklin and crew? Yeah, it definitely is. The other thing is if you go promote Poindexter, there's so many problems here because Poindexter hasn't called plays in the past, or I'm sorry, hasn't called plays since 2015 with UConn. In those years, he wasn't that good. Anthony Campanelli has never called plays before, so that's another risk. Jim Knowles, you can't really bank on Jim Knowles actually coming to Penn State because it just doesn't sound realistic. It sounds like he has his his wife has his heart set on Oklahoma right now. And, happy wife, happy life. That's just how it works. So, in a grand scheme of things, Jim Knowles is that home run hire, a grand slam hire even, I'd even say, because that would be enormous to steal a Big Ten defensive coordinator. Not only steal a Big Ten defensive coordinator, steal the one of the defending national champs. So that's the a grand slam of it. I'm indifferent between Poindexter and Campanelli for that job now. If I had to pick between the two, I'd probably just go Poindexter because I trust the guy. He knows Penn State. He understands it. He's called plays before. I think Campanelli could be a damn good DC down the line. Don't get me wrong. I just think it's very risky for a Penn State squad that is going into this season with national championship expectations. With that being said, I'd probably say, if gun to my head right now, if I had to pick someone, who it's going to be, based on who I've talked to and who we've heard from in our sources and everything, it's probably going to be Poindexter. He's been the name that's been consistent all along. I think that James went out and tried to find a defensive coordinator, whether it be Lynn, Bonda, Knowles, etc. He looked into those guys. He tried to get those guys. It didn't end up working out. So I think you just do the safe thing. You go promote the guy from within. And this also allows you to promote Dan Connor. I know Dan Connor's technically already the linebackers coach. Like, he's in charge of that room completely. Does he have the title right now? No. Does he need the title technically? No, because you could just kind of send anyone on the road at this point. Because there's just kind of no rules. You just have to rotate the guys, basically. So despite there being 10 assistant coaching spots, there's really no limit anymore. You could send your quality control assistant on the road. You just have to get him on the road and switch someone off the road, which it's not that hard. It's very simple, actually. So I guess you can give Dan Connor a promotion, and I think Dan Connor down the line could be a great DC as well. And I think that's a guy you have to really monitor and try to keep on staff as long as possible. Now, if he wants to leave for a smaller school and go get some DC experience, by all means, I'm not opposed to it. But I also want to keep him with this unit because this linebacker unit is going to be very green next year. We know Tony Rojas has had his struggles, so they need some coaching there. But he's kind of bounced back a little bit too towards the end of the season. But they lost Kobe King to the NFL draft. There's Dominic DeLuca returns, yes, but they still don't have another guy. Tamir Robinson's coming off a serious injury from high school. Espeka, Anthony is solid, but these are young guys. These guys haven't played many, if any, snaps at all. So you want to keep Dan Connor around as long as possible. And if you could find an LB's coach like a Anthony Campanelli to come in, it's hard to really say no to it. But right now, I'm still leaning Poindexter. Now, I've had some people ask, like, why is this job like taking so long? Like, why is like everyone turning it down? And there's a couple factors. I mean, one of the major ones, and I've said this in the last podcast, is the fact that it's central Pennsylvania. It's hard to convince people that aren't from the area to come to the area. We know Tom Allen's wife wasn't happy after 1 year in State College. We know D'Anton Lynn's wife had no interest in leaving Los Angeles for State College. Again, like I'm not a big fan of LA. I don't think it's anything special. I actually think it's kind of shitty. But it's hard to convince these people to come to State College. Jim Knowles' wife just says she hates Ohio. They just won the national championship. You don't want to run it back? And it sounds like she wants to go back to Oklahoma, which is crazy to me. Like, you can't convince me there's more to do in Oklahoma. But it is what it is. So it's not an easy sell. On top of it, James Franklin's pretty adamant about keeping the scheme the same ways. And on the defensive end, at least, the offensive end you can kind of tweak with here and there, based as you can see with Colton Nicky versus Mike Yursich a couple years ago. But defensively, it's still going to be a 4-2-5. So you're already limiting your candidates when you say we're keeping the scheme. You're also going to limit your candidates when it's not just scheme, but it's also if you want to get someone with defensive coordinator experience, you're also limiting that batch of candidates. So you just cut this part in half, and then you cut that half in half. Now you're down to a quarter of the candidates that you originally wanted. Are they limiting it to that? No, obviously, because Campanelli doesn't have defensive coordinator experience, versus Poindexter and Lyle Hemphill, who do have defensive coordinator experience. So it's very tough. It's a very tough call. We know that Hemphill has talked to Penn State. We know that Anthony Campanelli has talked to Penn State. We know that Poindexter, of course, has talked to Penn State. We know that Jim Knowles has talked to Penn State. So technically, I know I said there's 3 names, but there's actually 4 if you count Poindexter, who's on staff currently. So that's really it. That's just kind of a recap of what's going on. I wanted to keep you guys updated. If you haven't already, check out pennstate.rivals.com, a.k.a. Happy Valley Insider. We have the Lions Den forum where all of this has been posted over the past week or two. So keep an eye on stuff like that. Hopefully we can do a podcast breaking down the new hire. But as of right now, it just seems like it's dragging on and on and on. And it just seems like there's a new day, there's a new name added, or a new name removed, I should say, old name removed. Because we talked about D'Anton Lynn, we talked about Ephraim Bonda, we talked about Jim Knowles. I feel like I'm missing someone too, but as of right now, the 4 names we're consistently hearing: Anthony Poindexter, duh; Jim Knowles, duh; Lyle Hemphill, new, sort of ish. I think I mentioned him in the last pod, and then Anthony Campanelli, brand new to the list. So keep an eye on those 4. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I expect some news to come out this week with the hire. but I wouldn't say it's guaranteed either. It just seems like it's just dragging on and on. But that's pretty much all I got for today. Nice early Wednesday podcast for you. But for me, that's another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast on HappyValleyInsider.com. Signing off.